Wednesday night, Brother Gary asked me if Amazon had delivered my illustration for this morning. But this morning's illustration, I owe thanks to Brother Johnny, whom I don't see. He's here somewhere, or not. He's not here. Well, Brother Johnny gets full credit for today's illustration. Did you get one? You didn't get Brother Johnny's illustration for this morning? If you didn't get one of these, there are a couple of reasons why that might be true. And one is that you and Brother Johnny haven't gotten together since the 1st of January. That's one possibility. One possibility is that Brother Johnny is delinquent in his responsibilities, and that's never the case. This is a record of Brother Johnny's record of your contributions to the Lord through the church in the last year. There are two events in your life which are financially significant. One is the record of your giving to the church and to other charitable organizations, and that should come to you by the end of January. The other important financial date is April 15th, if you're an American, in which you take these papers and you put them all together with the papers that your employer has given you and the records of all your financial income in the last year, and you send your share of taxes to the government. So if you didn't get one of these, it could be that you never pay by check, or you never use the envelope system for giving. It may be that you just never give. My message this morning is profit is not a dirty word. Now that's profit with an F and not with a PH. I realized this morning that I needed to be more careful when people ask, what are you talking about? Because somebody might have thought I was talking about the book of Daniel, which I'm not. Okay. Profit is not a dirty word, P-R-O-F-I-T. Contrary to what some politicians would have you believe, there is nothing wrong with profit. Contrary to what many people believe, not only is it not wrong, it is right. And as a Christian, I declare that profit is not a dirty word. Now I want to prove that to you. You all know the parable of the talents, where the master gives to different servants different numbers of talents, and then he calls them to give an account of what they've experienced. There's a similar parable, different but similar, the parable of the pounds, where the master gives every servant the same amount of money and says, we'll have a reckoning later on. Now, we know those stories. One is in Matthew, one is in Luke, and if you don't know them, you should go back and read them. Because while there are some similarities, there are some differences. In the parable of the talents, they get different amount from the master. And when they give account, the reckoning that they give is, I've done this, I've done this, I've done this. In the parable of the pounds, each of them gets the same amount of money. And at the end, they come and they say, your pound has done this. Your money has done this. And so in one, we have the will of the worker accepting responsibility for the income. And in the other, we have the worker attributing everything to the master. Those are two sides of a theological coin, by the way. The free will of man and the sovereignty of God. If you can balance that, you and I need to talk, okay? But those two parables are clear in making that distinction. But one thing that is common to each of them is this, that there is a day of reckoning for the servants. The master will call his servants before him, and the master will say, what have you done? What have you accomplished? What have you seen in my absence? And the other thing that is equally clear is that the master expects profit. In the parable of the talents, the guy who comes and says he has nothing to show for it and throws the money back in the feet of the master says, I buried it. In the parable of the pounds, the one who comes and says, I don't have anything to show for it except the one you gave me, I kept it safely in a napkin. Neither one of them has a loss in his profit and loss column. Neither one of them has lost, but neither one of them has gained. The problem is that there is no advancement for the master's glory in either life. The problem is that there is no profit. There's no loss, but there's no profit. Sometimes we think that maintaining the status quo is good enough. As long as we're no worse today than we were when we started, we're okay. But that's not the case. So there were these two southern gentlemen, who shall remain nameless, who decided that they wanted to get into the watermelon business. And so they found a farmer who had a good supply of watermelon. They bought them, and they loaded up their pickup truck, and they drove north. And they sold a whole truck of watermelon in no time at all. They're driving back south, and one of them's doing the bookkeeping, and he says, you know, we bought those watermelon for $1, and we sold them for 50 cents. We didn't make much money. The other guy said, no problem. Next time we'll get a bigger truck. And I think that's the way many Christians live. They don't expect to see any profit in their lives. They don't expect to see any advancement in the kingdom. They don't expect to see any increase in the glory given to God. They never keep record. They never, ever think it's important to profit. They are satisfied with the way things have been for too long. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, please. 1 Corinthians chapter 10. And you should know how important verse 31 is to me. It was the proof text for the first question of the Westminster Catechism. What is the chief end of man? To glorify God and to enjoy him forever. My problem is that's not enough. It wasn't enough in the days of Paul and for the church at Corinth, and it's not enough for us either. Because too often we read that and say, yes, I must do everything for the glory of God. Whether I'm eating or drinking, whatever I'm doing, I should do it for the glory of God. But how do you do that? How do you do that? Two ways, positively and negatively. The negative first. You do not glorify God when you offend the Jews. You do not glorify God when you offend the Gentiles. You do not glorify God when you offend the church. That's the negative. Brother Jamie has been quite clear at the last few weeks dealing with the subject of offending. Okay, so I know I shouldn't offend people. Did you read about the cruise line that now has no offensive clothing to be worn on their cruises? You didn't read that? It's great. You need to check it out. Some poor guy says, there's always going to be somebody who's offended by what you're wearing, or not wearing, as the case may be. They'll be offended by any letter on your shirt or your cap. He says, you can't get away from it. And that's true. You can't get away from offending people. But as a Christian, I should never offend somebody to the point where they hate my God. Right. Don't offend Jews. Don't offend Gentiles. Don't offend the church of God. That's the negative. That's the don't part. Now, the positive part is in verse 33. Even as I please all men in all things, not seeking mine own profit, but the profit of many, that they may be saved. Profit is not a dirty word. We need to evaluate the profit that our lives generate for our master. Because he will return. He will call us to give account of every word that we've spoken. And when we stand before him and give account and we cast our talents or our pound in front of him, what will we say? I knew that you were an austere man and that you reaped where you never sowed. And I knew that you were the sovereign of the universe, and I knew that you were in control of all things. And so I was afraid that somebody might steal this. And so I hid it in the earth, or I wrapped it in a napkin, and I protected it, I cherished it. I took it out, and I wiped it and cleaned it, and I brought people in and had them look at it, and I bragged about it, and I displayed it honorably where everybody could see it. I wanted them to know that you were glorious. But that's not going to matter. You can have every doctrinal I dotted and every doctrinal T crossed, and you can quote the catechism forwards and backwards and in and out, and you can memorize all the verses, and you can go to every church service, and you can pray 3 times a day, morning, noon, and night, and you can do all of that stuff. But what has it profited? What does it profit a man if he gained the whole world and lose his own soul? I'm here to profit others. I glorify God by profiting others. I glorify God by not offending others, but that's not enough. 10 Commandments. Don't kill. That's the negative. The positive is preserve life. Don't steal. That's the negative. The positive is protect. The commandments are negatives and positives statements. But for every negative, there's a positive that goes with it, and for every positive, there's a negative that goes with it. And so the commandment here to glorify God in all things requires a positive and a negative response. It's not enough to believe that I should glorify God in everything I eat and drink or whatever I do. It's not enough just to believe. Faith without works is dead. What are the works that go with this belief? And those works are not offense, but to profit others. It doesn't stop there. Be followers of me, even as I also am of Christ. And so the question is not what would Jesus do, but what did Jesus do? Did Jesus glorify his Father in all things? Yes. Did Jesus offend people to make himself look good, to make others look bad, to get votes, to rise in the public polls? No. The gospel is an offense. There's no denying that. When a sinner is faced with his sin, he is offended by it or he's sorrowful for it. We can't change that. But Jesus didn't go around just picking on people. And that's clearly the point. I grew up in a community that was full of immigrants from all over the place. There were those of us who were pure Americans, however. And it was easy for us to poke at others. We poked at Southerners too, because we were Yankees. And everybody does. The Yankees were first. But at some point, you realize that that's not the right way to look at people. They may be tall or shorter than you are. They may be fatter or skinnier than you are. They may be lighter or darker skinned than you are. They may speak funny. There could be lots of reasons people are different. But in the end, every one of us is a servant of God. Every one of us is responsible to God. And Jesus didn't go around just picking on people. In Romans 15 and verse 3, turn there, please. Well, let's read in verse 1. We then that are strong ought to bear the infirmities of the weak and not to please ourselves. Let every one of us please his neighbor for his good to edification. For even Christ pleased not himself, but as it is written, the reproaches of them that reproached thee fell on me. It would have been easy for Christ to come into this world and to require the service of others. But he came not to be ministered unto, but to minister and to give his life, that others might profit from him. Profit is not a dirty word. It's an often ignored word. It's got a bad reputation, and it shouldn't. Obviously, I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about something much more valuable. So we're not so worried about Brother Johnny's note or the requirements of the Internal Revenue Service. But each of us will stand before God and give account of the pounds and the talents that God has given us.